There is a machine that spun on its own, driven by steam, inside a temple in Egypt 1700 years before the Industrial Revolution. No horse turned it, no slave pushed it, no hand touched it. A hollow metal ball, mounted on a stand, began to rotate faster and faster until it was a blur, powered by nothing the crowd could see. And the man who built it wrote down exactly how to make it, step by step, in a book that survived. The instructions still exist. You can read them today. A working steam engine, described in full in the 1st century in the land of the pharaohs. And here is the part that should stop you cold. After it was built, after it spun, after it was written down and copied and shelved, the world did nothing with it for the next 17 centuries. The knowledge sat there. It was seen. It was recorded. And then it vanished from every workshop on Earth until a Scottish engineer reinvented the same principle from scratch and changed the entire planet with it. Today, we are going to go through exactly what this machine was, who built it, how it actually worked, and why the greatest engineering mind of the ancient world used the power of steam to open temple doors and pour wine for statues, and never once turned it toward the thing that would have remade civilization. Stay with me, because the machine everyone remembers is not the part that should unsettle you. The part that should unsettle you is what he knew, wrote down, and we somehow lost. Most people have never heard the name. They know James Watt. They know the steam trains, the factories, the smoke of the 1800s. They are told in every textbook that the age of steam began in Britain a couple of centuries ago, and that before that, human beings had no idea steam could do work. That story is wrong. It is off by more than 1,000 years, and it is off by an entire civilization. Because the first person known to have harnessed steam to produce motion was not a British inventor in a cold northern workshop. He was a Greek engineer living in Egypt, teaching in the greatest center of learning the ancient world ever produced. And he did it while the Roman Empire was still young. His name was Hero. Some texts call him Heron, Hero of Alexandria. He lived and worked in the 1st century, most likely between the years 10 and 70, in Alexandria, the coastal city on the edge of the Nile that the Greeks had built into the intellectual capital of the world. And Hero was not a minor figure. He was, by any honest measure, one of the most inventive human beings who has ever lived. He taught at the museum, the great research institution attached to the legendary Library of Alexandria, a place unlike anywhere else in the ancient Mediterranean, where the finest minds of the age gathered to study mathematics, physics, and machines. And the deeper you look into what Hero actually built, the stranger the picture becomes. Because this was not one lucky invention. This was a man who seemed to be operating with a level of mechanical understanding that the world would not see again for over 1,000 years. The steam engine was only the beginning of what he made. Most people who hear the phrase ancient Egypt picture tombs and pyramids and gold. They do not picture machines. They do not picture automation. And that is exactly why the real story of Hero of Alexandria almost never gets told. Because what he built does not fit the story we tell ourselves about the ancient world. It fits a different story entirely. One where a civilization stood at the very edge of an industrial age, looked over it, and walked away. Let us start with the thing you could have seen with your own eyes, standing in a temple in Roman Egypt. You could not have understood it, but you could have watched it happen, and it would have looked like the work of a god. Imagine you are a worshiper approaching a temple. The great doors ahead of you are shut. A priest steps forward to an altar out front and lights a fire. Prayers are spoken, the flames climb, and then, with no one touching them, with no visible mechanism, no rope, no lever, no hand, the heavy temple doors swing open on their own, slowly, silently, as if the deity inside has heard the offering and opened the way. The crowd gasps. To them, it is proof. The gods are real, and they are present, and they answer fire with a sign. It was not a god. It was Hero. The doors were a machine. And we know it was a machine because Hero wrote down precisely how to build it in his book on pneumatics, The Science of Air and Pressure and Steam. The mainstream reading of this, the safe reading, is that it was a clever trick, a piece of temple theater, a way for priests to impress the gullible. And that reading is true as far as it goes, but it misses what is actually sitting inside that altar. Here is how the doors really worked. And this is not a guess. This is Hero's own recorded design. Beneath the altar, hidden from view, sat a sealed metal sphere, partly filled with water. A tube ran from a chamber under the altar's fire down into that sphere. When the priest lit the flame, the air inside that hidden chamber heated up. Hot air expands. That expanding air pushed down on the water in the sealed sphere and forced the water through a bent pipe out of the sphere and into a suspended bucket hanging on a chain. As the bucket filled, it grew heavy. It sank, and the chain it hung from was wound around the vertical pivots of the temple doors. As the bucket dropped, the chain turned the pivots, and the doors rotated open. When the fire was allowed to die, the air cooled and contracted. The water was drawn back into the sphere, the bucket rose, and a counterweight pulled the doors shut again. Read that again and strip away the temple. What you are looking at is a thermal system. Heat becomes pressure. Pressure becomes motion. Motion becomes useful work. That is the exact chain of logic at the heart of every steam engine that would ever be built. A priest lighting a fire on an altar in 1st century Egypt was, without a single person in that crowd knowing it, operating a heat engine. For decades, historians filed this under religious deception, a parlor trick for the faithful. But that framing quietly buries the real point. To build a machine that turns fire into the automatic movement of tons of door, you have to understand that heated air expands with force, that force can be transmitted through water, that water can be moved through a sealed siphon. That weight can be converted to rotation through a pivot. That is not superstition. That is engineering. Hero was not fooling the crowd with magic. He was fooling them with physics they had no way to detect. And that is the first clue. Because if he understood heat and pressure well enough to open a door with it, the obvious question is how far he took it. And the answer is much, much further than a door. If you find buried history as unsettling as I do, subscribe and turn on the bell, because the next thing this man built takes the exact same principle and points it straight at the future we think we invented on our own. Here is where it gets stranger. The temple doors used hot air, but Hero did not stop at hot air. He went to steam. And with steam, he built something that has no ancient purpose at all, something that only makes sense if you already understand what steam can do. In the same body of work, Hero describes a device he calls, in plain terms, a machine driven by steam. Modern historians know it by another name, the aeolipile. The name comes from aeolos, the Greek keeper of the winds, and it translates roughly to the ball of the wind. But forget the poetry of the name, because the object itself is pure mechanism. Picture a small cauldron of water sitting over a fire. Above the cauldron, mounted on 2 pivot tubes so that it can spin freely, sits a hollow metal sphere. Steam rises from the boiling cauldron, travels up through the hollow pivots, and fills the sphere. And here is the crucial detail. Coming out of the sphere are 2 small tubes bent at right angles, pointing in opposite directions, like 2 little nozzles aimed sideways. As the steam builds pressure inside the sphere, it has only one way out. It escapes through those 2 bent nozzles in high-speed jets. And as the steam shoots out one way, the sphere is pushed the other way. 2 jets, 2 opposite directions, and the whole sphere begins to spin. Faster and faster, hissing, blurring, spinning on its own, with nothing but fire and water beneath it. Stop and look at what that actually is. Steam is being used to produce continuous rotary motion. That is the entire foundation of the industrial world. And the principle driving it is not a minor one. When the steam blasts out of those nozzles and drives the sphere in the opposite direction, that is the same physical law that launches rockets. Action and reaction. The escaping mass pushes back against the thing it leaves. Hero built a reaction turbine, a rocket principle spinning on a pivot, using steam in the 1st century in Egypt. Not a myth, not a metaphor. A machine that works, that has been rebuilt hundreds of times by modern engineers from his own instructions, and that spins exactly as he described every single time. And this is the secret at the heart of how it ran, the thing that separates a toy from an engine. The sphere does not spin because the steam pushes against the outside air, the way a sail catches wind. It spins because of what is happening inside it, at the nozzle. As steam fires out of each bent tube, the tube itself is shoved backward by the departing jet. And because the two tubes point in opposite directions, those two backward shoves do not cancel. They add, they twist, they combine into a single rotational force turning the sphere around its axis. That force is called torque, and it is the exact thing every engine on Earth is built to produce. The faster it spins, the more the drag of the air and the friction of the pivots fight back, until the machine settles into a steady, screaming, self-sustaining spin. It regulates itself, it reaches a balance and holds it. Hero did not just make steam move something once. He made steam hold a continuous, stable, self-governing motion. And that is the property that makes an engine rather than an explosion. Think about what had to be understood to reach that. That water becomes steam and expands violently. That confined steam builds pressure. That pressure, released through a shaped opening, becomes a directed jet. A directed jet produces thrust in the opposite direction. That two thrusts, aimed correctly, become rotation. Each one of those is a genuine physical insight, and Hero chained all of them together into a single working object. He was reading the same rulebook that modern engineers read. He was just reading it 2,000 years early, and in a world that had no idea what to do with the answer. And unlike so much of ancient history, we are not reconstructing this from a broken fragment or a vague legend. We have his words. Hero does not just mention the device. He gives instructions on how to make one. Place a cauldron over a fire, he begins, and then walks the reader through the tube, the lid, the pivots, the ball, the bent pipes bent in opposite directions. It is a recipe. It is a build manual, a step-by-step engineering document for constructing a steam engine, written down while the pharaoh's temples still stood and the Colosseum in Rome was not yet built. This is the second clue, and it is the one that turns a clever trick into a genuine mystery. Because a man who can write a build manual for a steam turbine is not stumbling in the dark. He knows what he has, so the question stops being, can they do it? They clearly could. The question becomes, why did they stop? And before we get to that, there is one more thing this man built, and it is the one that should make the hair on your arms stand up, because it proves he understood not just steam, but automation itself. Walk into one of those Egyptian temples, and you would find a basin of holy water. Worshippers were meant to pay for it, then take their share. But people are people, and they took more than they paid for. So the priests came to Hero with a very ordinary problem: theft. And Hero solved it with something that would not appear again in the world for more than 1,000 years. He built a machine that took a coin and gave you a product. He built a vending machine. Here is how it worked, and again, this is his own design. You dropped a coin, a silver 4 drachma piece, into a slot at the top of a sealed vessel. The coin fell and landed on one end of a small balanced lever, like a tiny seesaw hidden inside. The weight of the coin tipped the lever down. As that end dropped, the other end rose, and the rising end lifted a plug, or opened a valve, letting a measured stream of holy water pour out of a spout. The water kept flowing only as long as the coin's weight held the lever tilted. Then the coin, still sliding, slipped off the end of the lever and fell away into a collection box. With the weight gone, the lever swung back, the valve dropped shut, and the water stopped. Insert coin, receive product, automatically, with no human being present. Think about what that requires. It requires the idea that a machine can be a substitute for a person. That a mechanism can take a payment, make a decision, deliver a good, and reset itself, all with no operator. That is not just engineering. That is the seed of automation, the concept that underpins every automatic system in the modern world, sketched out in an Egyptian temple in the 1st century. The next coin-operated machine of that kind would not appear until the 1880s in England, selling postcards and tobacco, running on the exact principle Hero had already written down 18 centuries earlier. So now, assemble the full picture. This one man in this one city built a machine that turns fire into motion to open doors. He built a machine that turns steam into spinning rotation. And he built a machine that turns a coin into an automatic transaction. Heat power, steam power, automation, 3 of the load-bearing pillars of the industrial age, all standing, all documented, all working, 1,700 years before the world claims they were invented. And this is where the mystery stops being about what they built and starts being about what happened next. Because a civilization that reaches this point should have kept going. It should have taken that spinning steam sphere and asked the obvious question, what if we make it bigger? What if we attach it to something? What if it could pull or lift or grind or move? That question, once asked and answered, is the Industrial Revolution. And as far as we can tell, in the ancient world, no one ever asked it. Or if they did, the answer was lost. That is the master question that will haunt this entire story. Where did the knowledge go? A mind capable of all this existed. It wrote its ideas down, and then the thread was cut. So what happened to it, and how much more did that mind build that we will never see? Now, this is the point where a strange fact enters, and it deepens the whole puzzle. Hero was not even the first to describe the spinning steam device. Roughly a century before him, the Roman writer Vitruvius, the same architect whose work inspired the famous drawing of a man in a circle, mentioned these hollow bronze vessels that produced a violent rush of wind when the water inside them was heated over a fire. And Hero himself was building on the work of an earlier Alexandrian genius named Ctet Eusebius, who lived some 300 years before, and who wrote the first known treatises on compressed air and built pressure pumps and water organs. This was not a single lightning strike of genius. This was a tradition, a lineage, generations of engineers in Alexandria passing knowledge forward, each one refining the pressure, the steam, the automation, building on the last. There was a school of this, a current of understanding running for centuries. And that makes the disappearance so much worse. It is one thing for a single inventor to die with his secrets. It is another thing entirely for an entire tradition of mechanical knowledge running across 300 years and multiple named masters to simply stop and leave almost no trace in the workshops of the world that followed. So where did it go? And this is where the story turns dark, in the quiet way that real history so often does. The knowledge went into a library, and the library did not survive. Hero taught at the museum, and its knowledge lived in the great Library of Alexandria, the single greatest collection of learning the ancient world ever assembled. And the library's fate was not one dramatic fire, whatever the popular image says. It was a long, slow undoing across centuries. A Roman military campaign in the 1st century BC Hero's time scorched warehouses near the harbor. Later conflict, neglect, and upheaval took their toll piece by piece. And its great secondary collection was shut down and scattered in the religious turmoil of the 4th century. By the time scholars in the medieval Islamic world began carefully translating the surviving Greek science, what remained was brilliant, but it was fragmentary. Broken, a fraction of what had once been there. Most of Hero's own writings are lost. Read that again. The steam engine, the temple doors, the vending machine. These survive only because a handful of his works happened to be copied, happened to be translated into Arabic and Latin, happened to slip through the centuries when almost everything around them was destroyed. We have his steam turbine by luck. And if that survived by luck, the obvious and chilling question is what did not? How many more devices did this man describe in the books that burned that we will never know existed? We are not looking at the complete work of a genius. We are looking at the scraps that survived the fire. It was written, it was copied, and then it disappeared. Not because it was wrong, but because the shelf it sat on did not last. And there is something almost unbearable about the specific way it was lost. This was not knowledge that was disproven, argued down, and abandoned because a better idea replaced it. It was correct. It was working. Modern engineers confirm it works. It was lost the way a house is lost in a flood, indifferently, mechanically, with no regard for what it was worth. The pages that described a steam turbine sat on the same shelves as the pages that described the vending machine and the automatic doors. And when those shelves were scattered, the knowledge did not migrate into the workshops of the world first. It just went quiet. There was no moment where humanity decided steam was a dead end. There was only a slow forgetting, a library emptying out over centuries, until the ideas that could have started an industrial age 2,000 years early were reduced to a handful of copied manuscripts in languages most people could no longer read. And the people who eventually did read them, centuries later, did not recognize what they were holding. They saw a clever old Greek toy, a curiosity from a vanished world. They did not see the beginning of everything. The blueprint for the modern age passed through hand after hand, and almost no one understood that they were holding fire. For centuries after, the idea kept flickering back to life and then dying again. In the 16th century, an Ottoman engineer independently described essentially the same steam-driven rotary device, and, like Hero, did nothing industrial with it. The idea kept being rediscovered and reshelved, rediscovered and reshelved, as if the world kept brushing against the future and pulling its hand back. The spinning sphere was reinvented, forgotten, reinvented again. And each time, it stayed a curiosity, a toy, a wonder for a temple or a court. Never once, for 1,700 years, the thing it so obviously was. Now, does this prove the most dramatic version of the story? That the ancient world had a secret industrial revolution, a hidden age of machines that was deliberately erased? Probably not. Let us be honest, because the truth here is strange enough without inflating it. The mainstream historians raise a fair objection, and it deserves to be heard in its strongest form. The aeolipile, they point out, was almost certainly never used to do real work. It was a demonstration, a temple wonder, a party trick, in the words of more than one scholar. And crucially, it was too weak and too crude to actually power anything. To turn Hero's spinning ball into a machine that could pump water or drive a mill, you would have needed precisely machined cylinders, tight-fitting pistons, and high-pressure boilers made of metal that could take the strain. The ancient world could not cast iron to those tolerances. It did not have the metalworking to hold that pressure, without the whole thing bursting. So, the leap from Hero's toy to a working industrial engine was not one clever idea away. It was a whole chain of missing technologies away. The reason James Watt's engine changed the world, and Hero's did not, was not that Watt was smarter. It was that Watt lived in a world with flooding coal mines that made steam power urgently profitable, with iron masters who could finally cast a true cylinder. and with investors ready to fund it. Hero had a clever sphere and a curious crowd. He had none of the surrounding world that would have made it matter. That is a real argument, and I am not going to pretend it away. The steam engine was not suppressed by a conspiracy. It was stranded by its own century. But strip away every dramatic theory, and the plain facts that remain are still stranger than the fantasy. A man in 1st century Egypt understood that heat could be turned into force. He understood that steam could be turned into continuous rotation. He understood that a machine could replace a human transaction entirely. He wrote the instructions down, he built the devices, and a tradition of engineers stretching back 3 centuries stood behind him. The knowledge was real. It was recorded. And then the thread that carried it was cut, not by malice, but by fire and neglect, and the slow erasure of the greatest library the world had ever built. You do not need a conspiracy to be disturbed by that. You just need to look at what was actually there and then look at how little of it we were left. Because here is what it means, if even the modest version of this is true. It means the standard timeline we carry in our heads, the one where human beings had no real machines until a few centuries ago, is wrong. It means the raw ideas at the foundation of the modern world were sitting in a book, in a language people could read for the better part of 2,000 years, waiting. It means the distance between the ancient world and the industrial one was never really about intelligence. The intelligence was there in the 1st century. It was about circumstance, about which knowledge survived and which knowledge burned. And if the mind that built a steam turbine and a vending machine left us only a handful of surviving pages, then our picture of what the ancients actually knew is not a finished portrait. It is a few charred fragments pulled from a fire, and we are pretending they are the whole book. And if we lost this much about a machine this important from a man this well documented, then the real question is not, what did they invent? The question is, how much more did they invent that we will simply never know? Because the only copies went up in smoke in a harbor in Alexandria, and no one thought to make another. The devices that survive, we can rebuild. Engineers do it in workshops today, following Hero's own words, and the steam sphere spins for them exactly as it spun for him. But the mind behind it described far more than the pieces we hold. Somewhere in the lost volumes, in the books that did not make it out, there may have been designs we cannot even imagine. Machines that were built once, spun once, amazed a crowd once, and then vanished so completely that we do not even know enough to miss them. That is the part that does not let go. If the people of that world could build a steam engine, automate a temple door, and invent the vending machine, and then lose almost all record of it, what does that tell you about how fragile knowledge really is? It tells you that a civilization can reach the doorway of the future, and then have that doorway erased so thoroughly that the next people to find it will believe they discovered it first. So who really built the first steam machine? Not a factory owner, not a modern engineer in a northern workshop, a Greek teacher in Roman Egypt, standing in a city of scholars, turning fire into spinning steel, while the world around him watched and called it magic. He wrote it all down, he explained exactly how it worked, and then history closed over it like water over a stone. The spinning sphere is still described in his surviving pages. You can read the instructions right now. But the mind that wrote them, and the countless other machines it must have dreamed and built and recorded, is mostly gone, burned, and scattered across 2,000 years, waiting in the dark of everything we lost. The first age of steam did not begin in Britain. It began in Egypt. And then it disappeared, and the world forgot it had ever happened at all. If this is the kind of buried history that keeps you up at night, watch the next investigation playing on screen right now, because the discovery in that one connects to this in a way you will not see coming.